The dungeon stank of mold and smoke. Torches hissed along the stone walls, throwing jagged shadows that seemed to twist and leer. Chains clinked as two hooded men dragged a woman down the corridor, her bare feet scraping against the cold floor. She was young, perhaps 20, and her trembling lips whispered prayers she had repeated since childhood. But God would not answer her here. Above ground, the church bells still rang with the promise of salvation. Down here in the vaults of the Inquisition, mercy was not spoken of. The men who held her were not common jailers. They were priests in black, men who believed they were carrying out divine justice. Her crime was not theft nor murder. She had been accused of whispering charms to heal a neighbor's sick child. Some called it witchcraft, others called it heresy. Either word was enough to seal her fate. The heavy wooden door groaned open, and the air grew colder still. A chamber revealed itself in flickering torchlight. It was not a courtroom. It was a theater of suffering. Wooden racks stretched across the floor. Iron claws hung from hooks. A pear-shaped device gleamed dully on a table, its cruel petals waiting to be forced open inside a victim's body. Every tool in the room had a single purpose: to break flesh, bone, and spirit until the accused confessed. She froze at the threshold, eyes widening in horror. On the far wall, dark stains told the story of those who had come before her. The Inquisitor, robed in crimson and carrying a leather-bound Bible, stepped forward with slow, deliberate steps. His voice was calm, even soothing. "Daughter, if you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. The truth will reveal itself through God's instruments." The woman shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am innocent. I swear by the Virgin herself." Her words were cut short as the assistant seized her arms and bound her wrists with rough rope. The Inquisitor gave a faint nod. The men hoisted her toward the rack, where her body would be stretched until joints cracked and muscles tore. The crowd that sometimes gathered for public confessions was not here tonight. But make no mistake, there was always an audience. Scribes sat ready to record every word, every scream, every forced confession. What mattered was not justice, but obedience. A broken body was proof that the church was right. A broken woman was proof that power could silence anything. As the wheel of the rack began to turn, her cry pierced the stone chamber. It was the sound of faith colliding with terror. This was not an isolated story. It was the beginning of thousands. For centuries, women would be dragged into places like this, accused by neighbors, betrayed by friends, condemned by strangers. Some would never leave alive. Others would leave shattered, scarred in ways the world could never see. They called it purification of the soul. History remembers it as something else: torture, sanctified in the name of God. The Spanish Inquisition did not appear out of nowhere. It was born in a world already burning with fear, suspicion, and holy zeal. By the late 15th century, Spain stood as one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe, freshly united under Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Their marriage had stitched together two rival thrones, and their new empire hungered for unity. But unity, in their eyes, meant obedience, not just to the crown but to the Catholic faith that defined their rule. The year 1478 marked the beginning of an institution that would terrorize the world for centuries: the tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Its mission was simple on paper: to identify heresy, root it out, and preserve the purity of the faith. But behind those noble-sounding words lay a system of fear and violence that targeted thousands of innocents. The Inquisition was not the first time Europe had seen religious courts. Earlier versions existed in France and Italy, but in Spain, it grew into something far more brutal. Ferdinand and Isabella secured permission from Pope Sixtus IV to create their own inquisitorial body, and they staffed it with men who wielded the cross in one hand and iron chains in the other. At first, its victims were Jewish converts to Christianity, called conversos, suspected of secretly clinging to their old traditions. Later, Muslims who had converted to Christianity, Moriscos, fell under suspicion, but the net widened quickly. Anyone who strayed from the rigid rules of Catholic orthodoxy risked being accused of heresy. And in a society that already distrusted women, it did not take much for them to become prime targets. A widow who owned property without a husband to guide her. A midwife who knew herbs and remedies that male physicians did not. A young girl accused of tempting men with her beauty. Even a wife who refused to obey her husband could fall under the shadow of suspicion. The Inquisition needed no solid proof. A whisper from a jealous neighbor, a rumor carried through the market, a husband's angry word during a quarrel. All of these could ignite the machinery of accusation. Once named, the accused had little chance of clearing their name. And once taken, they vanished into a world most people dared not imagine. The Inquisition defended its use of torture with chilling logic. They claimed that pain purified the soul, that suffering burned away sin like fire purifies gold. If a woman confessed under agony, her confession was evidence that the church was right all along. If she refused to confess, more pain was applied until she did. In either case, the result was the same. The Inquisition always won. Records from the period are filled with phrases meant to mask horror in piety. Torture was called the question. Confession was called the cleansing. Those who died during questioning were said to have been delivered unto God. Behind this language lay a system that used racks, flames, irons, and ropes to tear bodies apart. The Inquisition's chambers were not random dungeons. They were carefully designed theaters of intimidation. Windows were small, keeping the air damp and suffocating. Chains clanged on walls to remind the accused of their fate. Priests stood beside executioners, blessing the tools before they were used. Scribes sat with quills in hand, ready to capture every word. Imagine being a woman led into such a chamber. She would be surrounded entirely by men, judges, priests, torturers, who claimed divine authority over her body and soul. She had no lawyer, no advocate, no family beside her. She was utterly alone. Some begged for mercy before the first rope was tied. Others clung to silence, praying that God would protect them. But God, in the eyes of the Inquisition, had already spoken through the hands of men, and the devices waiting in those rooms were not crude tools. They were carefully crafted machines of pain. Each one was designed with a single purpose: to exploit the fragile points of the human body, to stretch it, tear it, burn it, and break it in ways that left scars long after the session ended. The rack could dislocate shoulders and hips in minutes. The strappado could tear ligaments from their sockets. The breast ripper targeted women specifically, a grotesque invention that turned their very womanhood into a weapon against them. What made the Inquisition so terrifying was not just the cruelty of these tools, but the way they were wrapped in ritual. Before torture began, the accused was given a chance to pray. Priests recited verses from the Bible as iron clamps closed. The torment itself was presented as a holy act, a necessary step toward salvation. This was not justice. It was a performance, a demonstration to the world that no one could escape the authority of the church and crown. And yet, despite the terror, whispers of defiance survived. Women who refused to betray their families, healers who kept their secrets even as their bodies burned, mothers who shielded their daughters with silence until their last breath. The Inquisition wanted obedience. What it created instead was a legacy of horror that history can never forget. The door closed behind her with a thud that echoed like a coffin ceiling. The Inquisitor gave a subtle nod, and the assistants dragged the woman to the first device waiting in the chamber, the rack. It was simple, almost crude at first glance. A heavy wooden frame with rollers at either end, ropes wound around them. But in the hands of the Inquisition, it became one of the most feared tools in Europe. The woman's wrists and ankles were tied to the ropes. At first, the rollers creaked slowly, pulling her body taut. She whimpered. Another turn, and her arms stretched unnaturally. Her shoulders strained, ligaments tightening like bowstrings about to snap. By the third turn, she screamed, a sound that clawed its way up the stone walls. The Inquisitor did not flinch. To him, her pain was not cruelty. It was proof. He leaned close, asking the same question he had already asked in the courtroom above. "Do you confess to practicing witchcraft? Do you deny the authority of the Holy Church?" She shook her head, teeth clenched. Another turn of the wheel. Bones popped. Her arms lengthened grotesquely, joints tearing apart under the pressure. The scribe dipped his quill in ink, calmly recording her cries as if they were evidence in a holy trial. And the rack was only the beginning. The next day, another woman was led into the chamber. This time, the torturers prepared the strappado. A rope was tied tightly around her wrist behind her back. From the ceiling hung a pulley. With a jerk, they hoisted her into the air, her arms twisted unnaturally. The weight of her body dragged down on her shoulders until the joints snapped out of their sockets. She hung there, dangling, gasping through clenched teeth. Sometimes, to increase the agony, heavy stones were tied to the victim's ankles, pulling her down further. The inquisitors called it a gentle method because it left no blood on the floor. But the silence it forced upon its victims was deafening. Some fainted, others begged to die. For women accused of heresy, there were even more specific instruments waiting. The most infamous was the breast ripper. Forged from iron, it was a clawed device, its curved hooks heated in fire until they glowed. The claws were pressed against the breasts of the accused and then ripped outward, tearing flesh apart in a spray of blood. This was not simply torture. It was humiliation turned into ritual. To the Inquisition, a woman's body was both her sin and her punishment. The records rarely mention names, only phrases. She confessed after being subjected to the claws. But behind those words were screams that echoed through the walls, long after the tools were wiped clean. Then there was the pear of anguish. At first sight, it looked harmless, almost delicate. A pear-shaped iron instrument with 4 metal petals, joined at the stem. But a hidden screw allowed the petals to expand once inserted. It could be forced into the mouth, tearing the jaw apart. Into the rectum, shredding tissue, or most horrifying of all, into the vagina, where it bloomed like a flower of iron and pain. The pear left few marks visible from the outside, which made it a favored tool when inquisitors wanted suffering without scars. Victims often bled internally, broken beyond repair. And still, scribes recorded the outcome in chillingly neutral words. The instrument was applied, and confession was achieved. One of the most psychologically devastating punishments was the witch's bridle. It resembled a metal mask, but inside were spikes designed to pierce the tongue and cheeks. Once locked in place, the woman could neither speak nor swallow without tearing her own flesh. She was paraded through streets as proof of her guilt, gagged and bleeding, forced into silence for hours or days. Neighbors who had once gossiped with her now watched from their doorways, whispering to their children never to cross the church. The humiliation was as sharp as the pain. And still the Inquisition devised more. The Spanish chair was a monstrous seat lined with iron spikes. A woman was stripped and strapped down upon it, every shift of her weight driving the spikes deeper into her flesh. Sometimes the chair was heated from beneath until her skin blistered and cooked against the iron. The inquisitors claimed this method was merciful, since it gave the accused a choice: confess quickly or suffer until her body gave out. In the chamber, mercy was only another lie. For those who endured all of these without breaking, there remained the oldest and simplest method: water torture. Buckets of water were forced down the throat of the accused, drowning her slowly as her stomach swelled. Some women died without confessing. Others broke, coughing up names of neighbors and friends just to make the choking stop. The Inquisition welcomed such confessions eagerly. Each new name was another spark to keep the fires burning. What tied all of these devices together was not only their cruelty, but their purpose. They were never meant to find the truth. They were meant to create it. Every broken bone, every scarred body, every forced confession reinforced the power of the Church. A woman's agony was transformed into evidence. Her silence became guilt. Her screams became proof. And while her body was destroyed in the chamber, her name was destroyed outside it. Confessed witches and heretics were paraded in public, dressed in shameful garments, before being burned at the stake or imprisoned until death. The Inquisition did not merely kill, it erased. These were not isolated horrors, tucked away in secret corners of history. They were deliberate, repeated, and systematic. Women were dragged from their homes, stripped of dignity, and delivered into a machinery of pain that called itself holy. And yet, through centuries of shadow, their stories whisper back to us, not in the dry records of inquisitors, but in the imagination of those who dare to picture what it meant to be bound, broken, and silenced under the weight of iron. The rack creaked louder with each turn, her body stretching until bone threatened to snap. Yet when she refused to confess, the inquisitors brought out another device, the pear of anguish. It looked harmless, almost delicate, until its iron petals spread inside her body, tearing her apart from within. Her screams filled the chamber, but to the scribes, they were just inked words. Confession obtained. Each device had the same purpose, not to reveal truth, but to manufacture it. And every broken woman became a warning. Resist the church, and your body would be its sermon. At last, the chamber fell silent. Her body was mangled, her spirit shattered, yet she still whispered, "I am innocent." The inquisitor's face hardened. A final order was given. She was strapped to the chair, iron heated beneath her until her flesh blistered and smoke filled the air. The scribes leaned in, quills ready, and then it happened, the cry that broke centuries of silence. She confessed to sins she never committed, not because she believed them, but because pain had written them on her lips. In that moment, truth itself burned with her. When the flames finally consumed her, the crowd saw only a guilty woman purified by fire. But history remembers something else, a system that turned faith into a weapon and women into sacrifices for power. The Spanish Inquisition ended centuries ago, yet its shadows remain. Every rack, every bridle, every iron claw was not just a tool of torture, it was a message carved into flesh. Obedience at any cost. Today their screams echo as warnings. What was done in God's name was never about salvation. It was about control, and control always leaves scars.